this actually doesn't look too bad, to be honest. Let's just make this 0.1, 0.2. Yeah, that actually looks pretty decent. It actually looks better than what I had before. Yeah, so let's actually just leave it like that. Welcome everyone. In this video series, we will be creating a chat application from scratch. And in the first video, this video, we will be creating the UI for our chat application. So before we actually get into any networking, we need the skeleton for our application, and we need to make our application pretty. So that's going to be the purpose of this video, is to create a design, and by create I mean steal design. The design that we will steal is this design on Dribble by Georgie. So credit to him for creating this beautiful minimal chat application, or design for a chat application. We will be the ones that are actually creating the app. And yeah, it's fairly straightforward, nothing too complex from a design perspective. And hopefully by the end of this video, it should look like this. Just fast forwarding to show you what it's gonna look like. Ideally, this should be beginner friendly. And even if you've never done any Flutter development, you should be able to follow along, or I should say, if you're new to Flutter development, you should be able to follow along. And yeah, hopefully by the end of this video, you will have learned a couple of Flutter tricks. Some elements that will require some additional work are the bottom bars that you can see at the bottom here, and the button with the actual shadow, and then the fact that we have a horizontal list in a vertical list as well. And then a lot of small things. And I'll show you the process that I use to actually recreate a design like this. And then in the next videos, we will take this beautiful design that we made and connect it to our Stream API. And from that point on, so hopefully by the end of next video, we would have a fully functional chat application that you can install on a device, create multiple users for, and be able to send messages from one device to another device. So yeah, with that said, let's actually jump into it and get started with the UI. Down below in the description, I will link the URL to GitHub where you can get the code for this. The final code will be on GitHub, as well as an entry point or a starting point where we will jump off in this project. So yeah, if you want to code along as this video proceeds, you can go to the branch called tutorial 001 base UI. So there are instructions to clone this repo and check out the correct branch. I'm already on this branch, so this is the entry point for our application. So this is where we will start off at, and there's not a lot going on. It's literally just this theme over here that has already been filled out. And don't worry, we will actually go into more detail discussing exactly what is happening over here. But just for the purposes of not making this video too long, it is probably going to be long already. The colors and stuff has already been entered here. So this should just be an extra convenience for you to get started. As a note for how I actually got the colors, seeing as this design didn't have any Figma files or the design files attached to it, I just took a snapshot. So if you're on a Mac, Command Shift 4, that is a shortcut to take a snapshot. And then in Figma, you can just drag the snapshot over, and I've already done that. And then I just create these rectangular blocks, and then for each of these, I just steal a color from the design. So as you can see, I made 2 palettes over here for the dark and for light as well. And yeah, in the process of this, I also identified a couple of additional colors for the text as well. But yeah, we'll get into them. As you can see, they're named explicitly, but as we actually start making these widgets, you will see which color is associated to what components. Before we continue discussing theming, the first thing that you should always do when you start a new project in Flutter is configure a linter. So a linter would basically be the IDE telling you or giving you warnings saying that you should be doing something a certain way. So for example, making a widget constant where a widget can be constant, or organizing your widgets in a certain style, or adding comments to public methods, for example. So there are a number of different packages that you can use to easily incorporate a linter or like suggested linters. We will use the standard Google maintained one, and it's called Flutter lints. So I'm just going to add that as a dependency, and I'm pressing Command-Shift-P to bring up the command palette, and this is a package or an extension on Visual Studio Code that allows you to easily add packages. I'll show you the package name now, but yeah, I'm just going to type in Flutter lints, as that is the package that we want to include, or the dependency that we want to include. And yeah, so Flutter lints, we will put this in dev dependencies. So dependencies allow you to add dependencies in your application that will be in the final compiled version of your app. So stuff that you will actually need for the application to run on someone's device. So if you're using like icons that you want to include in your package or in your application that comes from a package, then it needs to be in dependencies. Dev dependencies are dependencies that allow you to speed up your development workflow. So normally these are packages that assist you in some way. Flutter lints is a dev dependency because naturally we only care about how the code is structured as a developer. And yeah, to enable the Flutter lints in our application, we will need to create an analysis options.yaml file. And for this to work, we just need to include it into our file over here. And this by default would include the Flutter lints that is suggested by Google. And I mentioned that I used an extension. So the extension that I used to add this package is called PubSec Assist. So PubSec Assist is just an easy way that you can add or update dependencies for Flutter. So yeah, definitely suggest getting that extension if you don't already have it. Okay, so now in our application, you can see that we actually get warnings now. So you can see we have problems at the bottom here. And one of these problems, as an example, is the fact that we aren't defining that these should be const. And it also even says that we should avoid unnecessary containers. So this is fantastic. This container is currently doing nothing, so that means we can just remove it. And it also suggests that we should be making this const, as an example. And yeah, we will actually not need this at all. So we'll keep it for now. One thing we would need to do is create a constant constructor for this. So what I just did is I made the my app widget. I defined that this can be a constant widget. So in Flutter, defining stuff as constant should be the preferred way that you create widgets in your application when you can. And what that means is that in our application now, when we say const and we compile this application to run or to be packaged into a bundle, then the code would be pre-compiled for this widget. So that also means that at runtime, it doesn't need to do additional calculations. And it also means that at runtime for the application, there will only ever be one instance of this widget in memory. But yeah, that's more advanced topic. So don't be too concerned about that if you're not familiar. But as a general best practice, definitely always mark your widget as constant when you can. So this is what analysis options does. It just tells you that, hey, listen, something can be constant. Okay, next up, we need to start creating some screens for our application. So what I always like to do is to keep my files organized is to name it based on the type of thing that it is. There are so many ways that you can organize your code, and it's always going to be dependent on the actual application and on the actual size as well. And yeah, this is just one way to go about it. Do not feel obligated to do it as I'm doing it, and do it in whatever way works for you. This may also change depending on the state management solution that you use. But yeah, in the screens folder, we will just create the home screen for now. Later on, we will add more, but yeah, for now, we're just gonna have this. And we will create a new stateless widget, and we will call it home screen. And import material.dart. And then in the home screen, we would always want a scaffold. And the scaffold is basically the scaffold. So if you're not familiar with the English term that is scaffold, it is essentially like the building blocks to a degree. This gives you a lot of things out of the box, and it also allows you to do things like pop-ups and notifications. And by notifications, I mean like a pop-up that pops up on the screen. And it gives you this app bar. It can give you a floating action button, a bottom navigation. This is basically everything that you might want in a screen. So for now, we're just going to create a center. And we'll give text, and we'll just say hello. And back in main, we are going to remove this, and now it will be the home screen. So one thing that we will note now is that it imports home screen. So in VS Code and probably Android Studio as well, this is a setting you can set to automatically import things if, or like as you type them. So home screen has automatically been imported, as you can see here. And in this instance, it's fine because in this main, we're probably just going to use home screen. But if we create more screens, it might make sense to actually create a screens.dart file and basically have this as like a single file to export all of the files in this folder. So then it would be easier later to just import this one file instead of importing 4 or 5 different ones. And it definitely cleans up your imports. So yeah, in this one, we're just going to say export the home screen. And in this instance, it's entirely useless doing this, but we are going to be doing it in later parts of this application. So might as well be consistent and do it from the get-go. So as you can see now, I'm just importing screens.dart. Okay, and home screen can be constant, material app can also be constant for now. So okay, great, we have our hello over there. The next thing that we can do is get the base theming ready for our application. So in the material app is basically our wrapper and for our entire application. And the amount of stuff that you can do in material app is just too much to actually cover in this video. There's a lot. So for now, we're just going to talk about theme. This will be the default theme. And in our theme file over here, you can see that we have an abstract class called appColors that we will be using throughout our application. And then we have this abstract class called appTheme, which has a static method called light and a static method called dark. Both return a theme data, and that is what's required in the theme over here. So the theme is going to be our default one. So we will say that this is the app theme, and we will say that we will need, not that, we will need dark. But we actually need to import it first. So import theme, and this is not going to be dark, it's going to be light. And you will see it's giving us an error. And that is because in the light method over here, it requires the theme data as well. And this is a little bit of a hack that we need to do to be able to use the Google Fonts package. And this is actually, we could have gone a different way, but I wanted to show you the Google Fonts in this video as well. So what Google Fonts is it is a package that I added. It's called Google Fonts, and it allows you to easily add all of the fonts that are hosted on Google Fonts. So what do I mean by that? If you actually search Google Fonts, go here, all of the fonts, I believe, that are hosted here, you can now easily add to your Flutter application. And as an example, let's actually remove this in the light one for now, and I'm going to remove it here as well. Okay, just as an example, you can see that I set our text theme to be the Moolish text theme, and by overriding the text theme, you are essentially saying that for the entire application, you want to use this particular text theme. If you do not set it here, it will use the platform default. For Android, that is, for example, the Roboto font. And yeah, iOS also has like a standard default font. But yeah, we are going to be using this one for this video. But as an example, you can get access to any font that is hosted on Google by using this package. So it's such a quick and convenient way to actually test and demo fonts in your app. The other process is a lot more tedious to add fonts to your application. But yeah, what we're doing here is we're saying that we're calling Google Fonts Moolish text theme, and then we are applying that the body color, so that the text color would be the app colors.text.dark. Okay, so what we're saying is that instead of default black or default white, we want the color to be this color over here, text.dark, and you can see it's here's a preview for this color. And yeah, this should now work in our app. But now this can't be const anymore. However, the home screen can be const. And now I can see that this actually did change color. So it went from black to like this gray color over here that we specified. And then what we can do now is we can say that the dark theme is going to be app theme.dark. And again, I'm just going to remove this for now and see if we can get that error showing, because it's definitely going to be an error later in the application. And same thing here, we're just saying that the body color for our text should be text.light. And this is a color that we defined. It's basically white. It's an off-white. And if we save this, now what we can do is we can say that the theme mode, we can specify that it should be something, we can hard code the value. So let's say that the theme mode is going to be dark, and I can see that it did a switch. And let's just refresh and then do light again. Okay, so at this stage, it's actually not giving that error that I thought it would. Let's proceed and see if it actually does or not later on. But yeah, if it does, we will actually come back and recreate that thing that I wanted to show. If not, forget what I just said. And yeah, so now we have a way in our application to switch themes. You can change the theme mode programmatically in your application. For this video, we are just going to be switching it between dark and light here and using hot reload to actually just demo the different states. If the theme mode is not specified, hard-coded like this, then it would use the platform default. So if the platform system is set to prefer dark mode, then here it will prefer the dark mode. Otherwise, it would be the light theme by default. So yeah, let's actually start with the dark one, just because. Okay, so now we can jump into the home screen and start creating our application. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is creating this nav at the bottom. So we want a way to, when you click this button, it should recreate the screen and show something else. Unfortunately, this design doesn't show us what the notification, call, and contact should look like. And we're just going to be ignoring them from a design perspective and also probably an implementation perspective as well. But I do want to show you how you can create the AppBar and have it be functional so they can actually change the contents on the screen. So yeah, let's get started with that. And for part of this process, you will see that we will eventually need 4 different screens. So we will create a new folder, and I'm going to call this pages. So instead of screen, we will now call it this pages. And we can call this the messages page. So this will be the default one, the messages. We need notifications, calls, contacts. So I'm just going to do that real quick. Okay, and then for all of these, we will need a widget, naturally. This we do not need a scaffold for, because we are going to be using the scaffold that is in main.dart. So we are, not main, sorry, in home screen. So we are going to use the scaffold already. We're just going to be rendering this within the body of the scaffold. So for all of these, we are going to be needing a stateful widget. So this one is the messages page. And for now, we're just going to return text, and we'll just say that this is the messages page. And this will be a center. And then we can copy paste this everywhere. And then for all of them, we'll just create the correct name. Okay, and then back in home screen, what we want to do is we want to create a list of our pages. So I'm just going to create a final, and this would be a list of all of those pages. So the first page that we want to show, so basically be at index 0. So we'll say 0, 1, 2, 3. It's going to be messaging. So let's see, messaging, notifications, calls, contacts. Notifications, calls page, and contacts. And yeah, we can create this as a const. So you can see that because our home screen is defined as a constant widget, this needs to be const as well. Now to begin, to keep it boring maybe, we are just gonna say pages, and then we'll return the first index. So this should now return the messages page. And if we do a hot restart, we should see it. Cool, messages page. And in the scaffold, part of that, we can do a bottom navigation bar. So the bottom navigation bar is what we see here. And Flutter has a default bottom navigation bar widget with like bottom navigation items, which you can look into. If you Google how to do this, there's a bunch of tutorials on that. But as I mentioned, this button over here, the action button, the blue one, this would actually make it a little bit harder to use the default bottom navigation bar. Luckily, you can see that this expects a widget. So in this thing, we can literally give any widget that we want. So as you can see now at the bottom here, there's a little bit of a test where it's being, it's not showing just because it's being cut off. But yeah, one thing that you can do to avoid that is to wrap your widgets in something called a safe area. And safe area works for the top of the screen and for the bottom of the screen, just because, for example, a notch may be cutting off what is rendered at the bottom of the screen, or at the top, I should say. To keep our code clean and maintainable, and also because it actually has a ton of benefits for Flutter when it comes to rendering and performance, we want to create separate widgets as much as we can. So basically create small isolated widgets that to the most part try and do one task or represent one entity well. We don't want to end up with a single widget that's just very, very long, just continues and continues and continues. So we could, for example, have that where all of the logic is in this one singular widget, but you should always prefer to create isolated widgets. And one way you can do that, which is not really creating a separate widget, but cleaning up your code, is by extracting a method. So the shortcut that I did was Command P on a Mac, or you can press this light here. So extract method, and let's try that again. It failed. Then you can see you can give a name for the thing. So I'm just going to say test. And what this does is it creates a method that returns the safe area in the function, and then we're calling the function over here, or the method. But this doesn't create a separate widget. And as I said, for Flutter, there is a bunch of reasons from a performance perspective that you'd want to recreate your own widget or create a separate widget for things. So do not prefer to do this, though there are times you'd want to do it just to create clean code. But in this instance, it does make sense for us to create a separate widget. So we're going to say extract widget instead. And we will call this bottom navigation bar. And now you can see that we have our, this has been extracted over here. And in the safe area, we are going to say that for the top, we don't want this to be true. We want this to be false. And for the bottom, we want this to be true. Just to explicitly say what we want to be in the safe area and whatnot. Okay, so for this, you can see that we need these items, and you can see they laid out horizontally. And to lay anything out horizontally in Flutter, you need a row. So a row is this way and a column is this way. And yeah, so let's do that as a starting point. We can create a row, and a row requires children. And you can see that now this is not a constant constructor, so our safe or our const can no longer be there. Okay, and as we know that we are going to be creating these items, and that these are like separate things, and where we can specify one looks the one way, like for example, this has this icon and this text. This says, let me zoom in. This is the bell icon, this says notification, this is the message icon, and this says messages. It's going to be rendered the exact same way, it's just different data for it. That's a good reason or a good indication that, hey, listen, we should be creating a new widget for this. So we're going to create a stateless widget, and I'm going to call that a navigation bar item. Okay, and we will for now just say text, and we'll say item. And then the idea is that we want 4 of these navigation items. So forget about the button for now. So let's create the first one. And then I'm just going to duplicate this. Okay, so now you can see item, 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 item. Okay, it's doing it 4 times. What we want to do in a row, you can say how the item should be aligned. So we're going to say main axis alignment, and you can get main and cross. And later on in this video, we will be using cross. But the main axis alignment is the alignment for what the main axis is, or how it's mainly laid out. So this is a row, so the main axis would be horizontal. For a column, the main axis would be straight or vertical. So what we want to say is main axis alignment, and you get different options. Center would obviously put it in the center. What we care about is spaced around. So you can play with these, but yeah, as you can see, this would evenly space all of the different widgets in the entire space that the row provides. So a row would take up all of the available width that it can. So if a parent tells the row, listen, I have this max width available. For example, I have 200 max width available. A row would always be like, oh, okay, I'll take all of the available width. Unless you actually tell the row not to do that, which is something we will explore later on in this video as well. But yeah, as an example, let's actually wrap this in a widget and call this container, and we'll give it a color, and we'll say that the color is red. You can see that this is the entire row size. If we were to give this a explicit width, so for example, like say 100, it's not going to do anything now. That is because in the bottom navigation bar, Flutter or the scaffold is essentially overriding the behavior. But if we were to wrap this in the center, then you can see that now it's broken, but now it's only 100 long. Okay, forget about that. Later on, this will make a little bit more sense. But what you need to remember is that Flutter works like this. A parent tells the child how big it can be, and then the child tells the parent how big it wants to be. But yeah, as we do this a bit more and do more examples, you'll become more comfortable with this. So yeah, in the navigation bar item that we just created, this is where we actually want to lay these things out. So you can see that we want icon and text. So to pass data in Flutter, there's many ways you can do it, and most of that delves into state management, but the easiest way to do it is through constructor arguments. So basically, in this widget, we will tell it what arguments we need to render properly, or what it needs. So the first thing that we need is a message. Okay, maybe message is not good, we will call it label instead. And then you can just add this as a final parameter. Again, the shortcut is Command P on a Mac. And the warning that we get here, it says that the parameter label can't have a value of null because it must be because it's a type that can't be null. Okay, so as you can see, we say that label cannot be null. To make something nullable, you have to put a question mark at the end. However, for this instance, we don't want to do that. We would instead want to make sure that the developers or whoever uses this widget passes it in. So we will say that this is required, and we will give the label value, or we will set the label. The next thing that we will do is we will get icon data. So icon data is the class that contains the information about an icon that we want to display. And same thing, we will just mark this as required and this.icon. Now for all of these, we would actually need to pass in the widget. So just gonna delete that label, and the first label we're gonna say is messaging. And the icon, we will say icons. We can say messages maybe. Let's see how that looks. And now what we're gonna do is, as you can see, these are laid from top to bottom, so vertically. So this will be a column. So we're going to return a column, and the first child is going to be an icon, and then we'll pass in the icon data, and then we'll give it text, and the text is going to be the label, and then we'll just format this. And now you can see everything jump to the top. We have messaging at the top here, and the label is hidden at the top here. So why is it doing this? It's doing that because this navigation bar item is telling Flutter that, or it's telling the child that, listen, I have all of this space. And a column says, cool, if I have all of that space, then I want to be as high as I can, or I want to be have as much height as I can. And that's what I said when we can restrict columns. So to restrict the column, you need to give the main axis alignment size, or main axis size, I should say. And here we would say that this by default is max. We want to say it's min. And yeah, there we go. Now it's back to what we had. It's at the bottom over here. And now we can make this, we're not going to make this, I guess we can make it constant for now. Later on we will replace that. But yeah, let's create these back in. And this should be messages. Okay, and then this one will be notifications. I'm just going to do this real quick. What we want to do is we want to get as close as we can with these icons. So there are services and packages you can use to add your own icons, or if you really want to, you can add vectors in your Flutter application. But to keep this tutorial simpler, we are just going to use the standard icons that we can get in Flutter. I'm actually going to use the cappuccino icons for most of these, for all of these, just because they look a little bit more like the actual icon itself. So yeah, icons comes from Google Icons, and cappuccino icons come from iOS. So it's similar to what an iOS icon should look like. So I'm just going to copy in a couple that I've already identified. Okay, so we're getting there. Next up, what we're going to do is we need to customize this a little bit. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to tell it to be a specific height. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this in a sized box, and I'm going to say that the height is 70. So as you can see, it just pushes it up to the top a little. And then what we're going to do is for the actual icon, I'm going to give this a different size. I'm going to say 20. So it makes the icon a little bit smaller. And then we want some space between the actual icon and the message. Okay, so the space between the messaging icon, we'll say size box, and we'll give it a height of 8. And then the text, we will customize it. So to customize text, you need to give a style argument, which is a text style. And then you can set a variety of different things. And what we're going to be setting is the font size. And the font size is going to be 11 for this one. So yeah, it's just making everything a little bit smaller. And this can be const. And as you can see, this text is not pure white, it's this off gray white. And the reason it's that color is because, remember, in the themes, we are overriding to say that, for example, in dark, we want to apply a body color of text light. Yeah, and the text light is this color over here. If we were to make this colors.green, for example, then you can see that it does like a gradient transition to green. Okay, so let's go back to our home screen. Next, what we need to do is we need a way to make these tappable. Okay, so to do that, there's a bunch of ways you can do it. We are gonna be creating, or we're gonna be wrapping it in a new widget called Gesture Detector. And the Gesture Detector has a variety of different callbacks. So one of them is just called onTap. Okay. And the onTap is just a function or function callback. So this void callback over here, if you go to the definition, you can see it's called gesture tap callback, and it's just a void function. And in this, we'll just say print, and we'll just print context maybe. So now if you take a look at debug console and you press one of these, you can see that we get a callback. What we want to do though is we want to know in our home screen over here, we want a way to update the page that we're showing depending on the one that we're clicking. So we need to know what the index is of one of these items when we click it. So it's going to be 0, 1, 2, or 3. Okay, and to do that, we will need to get a callback back from this function. And we'll also need to know the index. So the first thing that we're going to do is in the navbar item, we're going to add another field, and this is going to be an int of index, and require this index. Okay, and then here we can now pass in that index. So the index is going to be 0 for the first one, and then it's just going to increase. So 1, 2, and 3. And here we will now just print the index. Okay, let's hot reload again. And now you can see it should print the index. So it's printing 0, printing 1, 2, and 3. Now we need a way to pass that back up. And we will use something that's called a value changed. And we will say that this is a value changed of int, and we're going to say that this is on tap. So value changed, if you take a look at it, this is a type definition. It allows you to specify a specific type. And as you can see, we are saying that the value change that we want is an integer. So this on tap is going to be a function that gets in an integer. So that's exactly what we want. So what we'll do is we'll call this on tap and we'll pass in the index. Okay. And now we just need to do the same down here. We need to tell it what's going to happen when this value change is called. So we can do that like on tap. Sorry, I forgot to add it here. We would need to add this as a required field, and we'll call it on tap. And let's just organize this correctly, and this would need to be final. So as an example, on tap, we can say that we get the index here, and now we can do the same. We can print it, for example. This is giving it a warning because this can't be constant anymore. So we can just remove the const, and now this should work. As an example, if we were to tap that. but we don't actually want to do anything in this widget just yet. We actually want to pass this up to the other parent. So to achieve that, we're going to do the same thing. We are going to create, we're just going to copy the onTap over here, and I'm going to paste it here. And I'm going to say on value, or let's say on item selected. And then we can pass this in again. Okay, perfect. And then this is now where we will pass it in again. And here we'll get the index and we will print that for now. Okay, and then in each one of these, instead of handling it here, we are just going to pass it down. So we're just going to pass down this on item selected. So I'm just going to copy paste all of this, or paste it in each one of these. And great. So now if we do a hot restart, you should see that it still works. Okay, so 0, 0, 0. All right, 0, 2, there we go. Okay. As you can see, I tapped this one here next to it. I'm sure you can hear the clicking, but it's not doing anything, okay? But if you actually press on the thing, then it does, okay? So great, we're getting the correct values. We're gonna fix this tab now, but let's explore again what's happening. In the gesture detector for an individual navigation bar item, we are calling the onTap and we're passing in the index that we set, okay? And in the navigation bar item, for each one of these, we are setting the index and we are saying that onTap call on item selected. And on item selected is again passed in here, and again it's passed in here, and then finally we get the index and we're printing that index. So one thing we can do to update this whole thing is by making this a stateful widget. So as an example, if you're familiar with Flutter, I'm sure you are, you can create a stateful widget, and over here we can say that the index, for example, we'll say that this is var index equals 0, and this is going to be the index, and we'll say set state. This is actually not the way that we're going to do it, just because there's a better way to do it. And I'll tell you why we're going to be doing it a better way. So now what we're saying is that the pages should show the index value, which is default 0. And each time on item is selected, we take what's selected and we set the state, this index value, to the new value. So now we should see that this updates to different pages. Let's just do a hot restart. Okay, I think this is not updating because we're naming this index. So I'm just going to say this is I. So this index was referring to this index there, which would not do anything. Now you can see it's updating. So messages, notifications, calls, contacts, etc. Great. But the problem is the fact that when we call setState in Flutter, you are rebuilding all of these widgets. So we are going to be rebuilding the scaffold as well, when in all actual fact, all we want to rebuild is the body. We also don't even want to rebuild the bottom navigation bar, though technically later on it's going to be rebuilding anyway. But for hypothetical reasons, if this was a more complex application, you would want to isolate your rebuilds. And it's a very good practice to do that, or get into the habit of doing that. Also, it would level you up as a Flutter developer, and it would also be of assistance to actually understand why you want to do this. And the main reason we want to do this is to avoid unnecessary rebuilds and to potentially save a little bit on the performance side. How much we're saving in this instance? Absolutely nothing. It's not going to do much. But for academical purposes, we are going to be refactoring this to be a little bit cleaner. So we're not going to be using setState. So I'm just going to undo all of this that we did. And I didn't forget about that click thing that I talked about. We will be getting to that in a minute. Okay, so we're back to what we were before. And what we're going to be using instead is a value notifier. So I'm going to create a new final value notifier, and the type for this is going to be int, and we'll say that this is called page index, and I'll tell you what this is in a moment. Okay, so a value notifier. One thing, now that we're doing it like this can actually no longer be a constant widget, but that's okay. A value notifier would notify you when a value changes. So there's widgets that can respond to this notifier changing, or for example, you can say page index dot listen, or you can't do it here. Page index dot add listener. So every time it changes, this add listener would be called. So this callback that you get here, this function, this would be triggered. And to update the page, you just call page index.value, which we will see in a moment. So by default, we set this to be equal to 0, and we set it to be a value notifier. And in the pages here, we're going to say page index.value. So restart, it should still work, it should still be the same. This can't be a constant anymore. Okay, we're back to normal, it's the same. And in the on item selected, what we're going to do is we are going to say page index.value equals the index. And now you will see that it's not going to do anything. And the reason it's not doing anything is because we're not calling set state. This builder is not rebuilding. The scaffold is not rebuilding. The page index is changing. If we were to add a listener, hypothetically, or I guess we can just add it, print page index. If we were to do this, as a side note, don't ever add listeners in a builder, because you don't control when the build gets called. Flutter calls the build to do layouts and may do it whenever. Maybe if you rotate your phone, there's better places to call a listener or to do complex operations. But yeah, for demo purposes, now if we press this here, you can see that, oh, okay, cool, it's doing stuff. But Flutter has a neat way for us to subscribe to changes in a page index. And what that is called, it's called a page value notifier builder. Oh, it's called a ValueListenableBuilder. What this takes is, it takes in a value listenable, which is the page index, and then it takes in a builder, which is a function that gets a build context, and it gets the value. So this would be an int, and we'll just call it value. And then it gets a child widget, but we'll just mark this as underscore because we're not going to be using the child. The child is something that we can set here. And you would want to do this if you want to create a child and re-show the same one again and again. In this instance, we just want to show one of these pages, depending on the integer value. So we'll return one of these pages. So pages, and then we'll say page index. Well, actually, no, we can just say value. Okay, and this should work. There we go. Okay, so now as this listenable changes, the builder changes, or the builder gets called, and it shows the correct page. And what's important to note here is that the scaffold doesn't rebuild, and the bottom navigation bar doesn't rebuild. Just this singular part is being rebuilt. Okay, great. So let's go back to what I said. And as I mentioned, if you tap here, outside of the area where it's painting something to the screen, it doesn't do anything. So there's ways you can go around that. You can, for example, make this a container and make the color transparent. That should work. Or in the gesture detector, you can say an on-tap behavior. Just a behavior, which is a hit test behavior. And you can look into what the different stuff does, defer to child and translucent. We're just going to set this to opaque. And what that means is that even if nothing is rendered there, the child is still taking up all of that space. So you can click outside of the actual stuff that's painted and it still works. So yeah, a neat little trick if you didn't know that. So we have some reactivity in our application. What we want to do as well is make this highlight. So we want to have this blue when the particular icon is selected. So in the bottom navigation bar, we are going to be doing one additional step. We are actually going to say that this is going to be a state for widget. So yeah, this is going to be the simplest way to do it. Sometimes don't be scared of stateful widgets. Well, actually, if you're starting out with Flutter, then always just use stateful widgets. That's what they're meant for. And yeah, in all honestly, I actually always prefer just using stateful widgets to manage state, unless you're really into a particular state management framework. But yeah, besides the point, what we're going to do is we're going to have a callback to handle when a certain item is selected. So handle item selected. And this will take in an int, and we will call it index. Okay, and for all of these now, we're going to say that this should be the handle item selected. So Command D is a shortcut to then select all of the things that are the same, and we'll call this handle item selected. And then here we will just again call the on item selected because we still want to call the parent handler. But then what we will also do is we will have a variable here called selected index, and the default one is going to be 0. But every time that this gets called, we will call setState and we will update the default value, and we will say that this is going to be the index. And now what we can do is in the navigation bar item, we can create another field, and we will call it is selected. And then here we will say that this is selected, and by default we will say that this is false. Okay, so we're not saying it's required, it's just going to be false by default. And then in each one of these we will pass in whether it's selected or not. So for example, is selected, and then we'll say is selected equals 0. So whatever the index is here, if it's equal to whatever is set in our state, then it is obviously the one that's selected. Okay, so we'll just do that everywhere and give the correct index. And now we need to do some customization depending on whether it's selected or not. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to check is it selected, and if it is, we will say appColors.secondary. And we need to import the chatter theme. So appColors, the secondary color is this one, so this blue right here. And then if it's not selected, we will say that this is null. So by default, the color is null. It's going to be null. And if you don't want to specify something, just have it use the whatever is default for the theme, just set it to be null. And while we're actually talking about that, if you go to the theme class, you can see that in our themes, we are specifying that we are using this icon theme, and the icon theme data, we're specifying the data, and we're setting the color to be icon dark for dark theme, and we're specifying that it should be icon light for the icon light theme. And this is globally setting the icon for us. So whenever you use an icon, it's going to be that color. Okay, so now you can see that this icon is blue because it's selected, and same for all of these as we select them. And we want to do the same for the text. If it is selected, oh, I didn't explain this. So what this does, the question mark, it says if this is true, do this. If this is false, do this. And that's the separation with the colon over there. So I'm just going to copy pasta this. And for this one, we will say that the color is again app colors dot secondary, and the font size we will font weight, we will set that to be bold. And great, now we have reactive like this. Something is broken. As you can see, the message pages is no longer updating. I think it requires a hot restart because we changed it to a stateful widget a while back. Oh no, it's still not working. Let's explore. So as you can see, we are calling widget on item selected, but we are not passing in the integer. So we need to pass in the index. By default, it does that for you, shorthand, when you pass it in as an argument over here. But here we need to actually pass in the index. This should work now. Okay, we're back on track. As a next step, we are going to create a AppBar. And the AppBar is this bar that you can see at the top here. And this is easy to do. You just set it in the scaffold. So as I said, scaffold is like the main thing for every page. It has an AppBar and you have a widget called AppBar. Just doing that, you can see that it automatically drops in an AppBar over there. If we actually do hot restart, it should actually show, it won't show back because it's the main page. Don't mind me. We do want to style this a little bit. And one thing that we can do is we can give it a background color. And the background color that we will give it is no color. We will set this to be transparent, okay? But now you can see that, why is it dark? Like, this isn't transparent. And that is because by default, an AppBar has like a little bit of a shadow. It has an elevation. And we need to set that the elevation is 0. So now if we set it to 0, for example 10, you can see it's very dark. Sorry about that. 0, it's going to vanish. And great, that's what we want because that's the style that we're going for. As you can see, you don't see the AppBar like a separation. Next, we want to give the title, and the title is just a widget. So I'm just going to copy and paste an example of what the title should look like. And there we go. Here's the title, and this is our text style for it. And we will say that this is a constant widget, but technically it's not going to be constant. We want a title that's going to be reactive to the page that we're on. So messages, it should show messages. Notifications, it should show notifications. So for that, we're going to do the exact same thing, but this time we will say that our value notifier is going to be a string, and this is going to be the title, and the first one is going to be the messages page. And here we will say this is title.value. Great, so it works. But again, we need to do the ValueListenableBuilder for it to be responsive. So I'm going to wrap this in a ValueListenableBuilder. And this gets a value listenable, and this time it's going to be the title, and then we will say the builder gets a context, gets a string value, and then finally it also gets a child widget, which we won't use again. And then we will return this. Okay, and then we can give the value. And now as you click it, oh, actually no. Let's just do a hot restart. Oh, that's obviously, I'm not actually setting a value for it, or not resetting the value. So when we actually have this on item selected. So we, just to make our code a little bit cleaner, I'm actually going to extract this method, and let's say extract method, and we will call this on navigation item selected. And great. For these widgets that are changing states, I prefer to have them at the top, and widgets that show UI, I prefer to have them at the bottom of the build. So as this is changing sort of, well, it is changing state, I prefer to have it here. And yeah, now what we want to do is we want to say that the title.value equals something new. But what is that new gonna be? It's gonna be dependent on the name of the page that we want to show. So we will say that we will have a list of page titles. And I'm just gonna quickly create this list. Okay, great. So here we will set this to be the page title and the value of the index, and now it should work. So now I can see notifications updates as well, or the title updates as well. And yeah, that's the finished part for this, to have this be reactive. Let's actually continue and make our additional modifications to the app bar. So as you can see, we need this search over here, and we need this icon over here. So for this, we'll need to create two custom widgets. We'll need to create this search, and important to note, you can see that it has like this, the icon has like this border over it, so like a little bit of a shaded, rounded border, and then this avatar will also easily be able to do. Okay, so to do both of those, we are going to be creating a new folder, and we will call this widgets, and in the widgets folder, we're going to create a file called widgets.dart just to export all of our different widgets that we will end up creating. And the first widget that we'll create is the avatar. Okay, so the avatar is going to be this icon over here. And just for speed's sake, I'm going to copy this over, and then I'll just explore the code with you because me typing it out is going to take quite a while. But feel free to pause the video and you'll be able to copy this by yourself. What we need to do though is we need a way to show an image, and Flutter supports many ways to show an image, but we're going to be using an external package called cache network image. Okay, so in PubSec, and the reason that we're using this package is the fact that, so as it says, it caches an image. So that means it's actually going to be storing it locally, so it's going to be faster to re-show the same images than as opposed to like continuously fetching an image. The caching is nice because like even if you close the app and reopen it, it's still going to cache images that it has already retrieved. So I'm just going to add that and search for cached. And this is the problem though with that package that I mentioned. Sometimes it brings in the wrong one. Okay, I brought in the correct one, cache network image. And then I'm just going to save it. And as you can see, we're running Flutter pubget. And avatar now it's no longer complaining with this import. Okay, and there's two different widgets that you can use in this. The one is the cached network image, which just takes in an image URL. So you give an URL to an image, and then wing walla wang, it works, and you don't have to do anything. It's going to show the image, and then you can style it and size it and whatever. Or you can use the image provider, and we're going to be using that because there's a built-in widget in Flutter called circle avatar, which, as you might expect, creates an avatar that's a circle. So you specify a radius, so the size of the circle or the radius of the circle, and then you give it a background image, which requires an image provider. So this cache network image provider just gives the provider equivalent of an image, and then you specify the URL. And the background color is the color that will show while the image is loading. Okay, so you might also have seen this and wonder, what is all of this? Well, we have our default constructor that takes in a URL and it takes in a radius that we specify here. So the radius can be set, or is set in the circle avatar, and the URL is used here. What the other constructors are doing, they're named constructors. So the small one is setting the radius to be 16, but it still requires you to pass an URL. Medium sets it to 22, and large sets the radius to 44. So this means that in our back in our code, we can quickly and easily use different radius in our application. So instead of us specifying that the radius is going to be 16 everywhere where we use it, we can just say that we want an avatar of small. So it just cleans up our code. So in our screens, in home screen, in the app bar, as you can see, we want the avatar to be at the very right. Okay, so at the very right, that is in the actions attribute. So actions is a list of widgets. So if we set text, test, you can see it shows the test over there. But we want to show the avatar. But we know that this is going to be a small avatar. So we'll say avatar dot small. Let's just import it, I guess. Okay, so now you can see that we're going to be importing the full path to avatar, which I forgot to do. In widgets, we're going to be exporting avatar. And then here, when we import it, we will import widgets. And then later, as we add widgets, it's going to be just way cleaner to do things. Okay, and we will say small, and this requires a URL. Okay, so we can give this any image URL. For simplicity's sake, for demo purposes, we're going to be using fake images. Well, we're going to be generating random images for our application. So I'm going to create a new file called helpers.dart. To speed up this video because it's already taking ages, I'm just going to copy this in. So feel free to pause or get this from GitHub. But what we're doing here is we are generating some random data. And the first thing that we are randomizing is the picture. And PicSum is a website that allows you to get images. It's an API to get images. And calling seed means that you can give a random seed, so some value that will give a random thing back based on the value that you give. So every time you specify that this is a test, for example, it's going to give you the same image. Here we're just randomizing an integer and getting, and getting a value back. And random date, we're going to be using that later. This is just creating a random date and subtracting stuff, but we'll explore that in a bit. Okay, so in home screen, we are going to say helpers, and we're going to say we need to import it. So import helpers and random picture URL. And let's just do a hot restart. Okay, something went wrong. I'm just going to terminate it and start again. Okay, we're back. And as you can see, it's loading a random picture and it works. So one thing you can see is that we want a little bit of spacing between the picture and the side. So we are gonna, let's just format this so it looks a little bit better. And I'm gonna wrap this in a padding. Actually, there's a better way to do that. There's a default wrap of padding. And we're just gonna wrap this on the right side. So only right. And we will say that this is gonna be 24. Okay, so now there you go, and you can see it already loaded a new image as well. The cache network image Bow package is actually not helping us now because it's reloading random ones, but once we get to the next part of this demo where we have actual data and it's not going to be changing randomly, this is going to be useful. Okay, so next up we have our avatars. So all of these are now going to be easy to render. What we want to do is get this button over here. So in widgets, going to create a new file, and we will call that the icon buttons. Calling it buttons because we're going to be adding additional icons later. And again, just for speed, I'm going to copy over this one, and then I'll just show you the code. And material.dart. So we are getting icon data, which we have done before. Data for an icon, and then this time it's a void callback. So in the other one we specified that we wanted a callback with an int value. This time it's void, so it's just returning a void function, not getting anything in. and import theme. Okay, fantastic. So what this does is, let me actually just display it for you first, and then we can go through it. So back in home screen, this is going to be the leading icon. So we will set the leading value to be, what is it called? Icon background. So icon background. But this is the main thing that we want to do now. In the widgets, we are going to export icon background. So now we actually, icon button, sorry. And automatically it should now be here as well. Okay, great. And then we can say icon. The icon is going to be, let's just say icon.search, I guess. And we need to pass in the on-tap behavior. Print, and then we will just say to do search. And there we go. So a couple of problems, but a couple of neat things. You can see it does like a cool little animation for us, but it's too big. And the reason that it's too big is because it's currently going to be taking up all of the space in the leading field over here. So we can circumvent this by just wrapping it in a center, and then it would be the size that you specify in the icon background or whatever. So in the icon background, you can see that currently we're setting the icon size to be 18. We're wrapping that with a padding of 6. So this space between the icon and there. If we were to make this bigger, then it's just going to make the icon bigger, but the padding will still be 6. And then we are wrapping it in an inkwell. And the inkwell is what's making this ink effect. Okay, we're setting that the splash color should be secondary, so the blue. We're passing in on tap, so this is our on tap handler. And border radius, we're giving the border radius for the inkwell because we are also specifying a border radius for this material over here. And this material is what is rendering this color over here. So for example, if we were to say colors.red, you can see now it's red. Okay, but we are saying that we want to use a theme of context.card color. And the reason we want the card color is because in our theme over here, we are actually specifying as particular card color. So card color in the theme.dark is card. Here, dark color is this one, which is card dark. It doesn't make sense to use these abstract classes anymore, but regardless. And card lights as well. So these card lights is going to be defined in the lights method over here. So where's the example? Card color, light colors, card. Okay. And the reason we're doing that is because later on we're going to be using a widget called card. So that's actually why we want to specify it here. But it's also an easy way to do it for anything that is a card type thing in our application. And this icon button is to a degree a card. It's like the icon is on top of a card. We could have said that this is a card widget, which we'll later use, I promise. But yeah, so this material, we're specifying the color and we're giving it a little bit of a radius, you can see. So the radius is going to be 6. So great. And if we don't set the border radius for this and we tap it, you can see that it makes it a square. Now it loses the effect, and that's why we need to do it on both. Okay, great. So now we have something that we can reuse if we wanted to create similar icons as well. And that's why I created this separate widgets folders, because the avatar and the icon button, those are things that we're going to be using throughout the application. It makes sense to have them as separate widgets outside as global widgets, and not something that's private that we're only going to be using in a certain screen. Okay. Now, one thing to note though is that we have a problem. We set the value for this one to be center, but actually, if you take a closer look, it's actually a little bit further away. So it's a little bit further away than what we would have had, or what it is now. So instead of saying center, I'm going to say align, and then align does that, align something. you specify the alignments, which can be a variety of things. What we want is to go center right. So center right, and there you go. Cool. But now it's actually a little bit too much. So what you can do, going a long-winded approach, is you can say that the leading width should be a specific size. Let me actually check what I set it to. We're going to set this to 54, and it brings it down a little. Okay, it's the little things that make a difference in these UI recreations. Okay, and yeah, now we have our app bar, and it's fairly close. The only difference is really the font, and yeah, I don't know what font this is, so it's not going to be an exact recreation just because of the font. Okay, next what we want to do is we want the stories. So let's do that. Let's just create the stories and then from there proceed to do the other things. So in the messages page, that's where we want to go now. Let me just see, what is this? Oh, we can actually remove our tests file. We don't need that. I'm gonna remove this entirely. Okay, and then in pages, for the messages page, we are going to create a stateless widget, and we're going to say underscore. We want it to be private, and what are we going to call it? Okay, we will call it stories. Okay, and for these stories, we want to return a column. Okay, and the column is going to be, the first item is going to be the stories, and then it's going to be a list view. So as a first value, I'm just going to copy this over. Yeah, just because it's just some theming. I'm going to say this over here and bring in colors. Okay, great. So we have nothing there yet because we're not showing it. So here we will return stories for now. Okay, great, we have that. Let's just wrap this in some padding for now. So next one we want to do is we want to give the list view for all of these items over here. Okay, so we're going to use ListView.builder. And builder is going to be building each one of these items individually. You can actually tell it how big the item or like how long the item index is, or you can not tell it and then it's just going to be infinitely big. And what this does is it gets an item builder that gets a context and an index, I think. Let me see, item builder, yeah, build context and an index. So and the reason this is complaining is because this cannot be constant anymore. However, this text widget can be constant. And okay, so now if we save this, you can see we should actually get an error message in debug console. Yeah, so in debug console, render box was not laid out. That is because this list view doesn't know how high it can be. So yeah, it's an overflow issue because we need to tell it what its height should be. So at this stage, it doesn't know, because it's also assuming that we want to lay out these things vertically. By default, a list is vertical. However, you can specify that the scroll direction should instead be an axis of horizontal, and now it will be laid out horizontally. But we still have the same problem, and that problem being that it again doesn't know how big it should be. So to fix this, we are going to wrap this in. We can specify that this should be a certain height, but instead what I'm going to do is we're going to wrap this in a size box. And excuse me, but I've already done this, so I know what the size should roughly be. we're going to say that the whole height for that whole container is going to be 154, and text is going to be at the top, list view is going to be at the bottom. But again, list view doesn't know how big it should be because the column is not sure how big it should be. Well, actually, the column does know, the list view doesn't know. And to fix this, we need to tell it to be a certain size. But what we want it to be is we want it to fill the remaining size that we set here. As an example, if we were to remove this and this size box, change it to be a container instead, and set this to be a color, colors.red, that's the size of, that's the height now, okay? What we're gonna do is we're gonna wrap this in an expanded widget. And that tells it to basically be as big as possible, okay? Or to take up as much of the space as it can. So great, we're getting somewhere. And if we were to change this back to a container and give the color, you can see that it would go all the way down here, red, okay? And to actually do that, instead of using a container, we are now gonna wrap this in a card. This is where the card comes in, and automatically it gives it a color. You can see that the card has this little gray color, and as you can remember in theme, we set the card to have this color when it's the dark theme. But for this particular thing, we are going to say that it has a margin, and the margin is going to be 8, okay? And we want to say that the elevation is going to be 0. So just making sure that it doesn't have like a shadow at the background. You shouldn't see it on this color, but like on light theme, the shadow would have actually shown. Okay, and now what we're going to do is in this list view, we want to return one of these or these individual list tiles. So I'm just going to copy the tile for that, because most of this should be familiar by now. And we will name it story card. Okay, so story card takes in story data. And this is the first model that we will create for this application. And a model is just a class that stores some of our information or some data. So in our lib, we are going to create a new folder called models, and we will call the first one story data, and again we will create models.dot. And just for simplicity, I'm just going to copy over the model, or for speed I should say. And this is a class of story data. And then we create a constructor, and then it has these two fields, name and URL, both of which are required. And we are setting that this is an immutable class, meaning that you can't update it later. Once it's set, once the object's created, you can't change any of these. That is also what final means. It means it can change. So great. This is the wrong place though. We want it in the story data file. And in models, we will export story data. And here we can now import models. And then we will import the avatars that we created. Okay, and I'll get into this code in a bit, but here now we are going to return the story card, and this requires story data. And to do this story data, we would need to get these two pieces of information, a name and a URL. So where do we get a name and where do we get a URL? We would need to actually generate that data, or like randomize that data. And to generate the random name, we are going to be using another package, and this package is called Faker. Okay, so this dependency is added. We'll save the file and automatically Flutter pub gets running. And then back here, we are going to create a new Faker object and just bring in that package. And what Faker allows you to do is get fake information. So here we will get a fake person and we will use the name. And oh yeah, I'm wrong here. We want this to be story data, and we'll give the name as Baker, and the URL we will use our helper method. So helpers and random picture URL. Okay, this should be URL. Okay, fantastic. And now you can see we're starting to get somewhere. It's a little bit, it's not quite there yet, but yeah, we're getting there. So in the story card, this is going to be a column. So a column top to bottom. The first one is going to be the avatar. Here we are now using a medium, and then we are setting that the column should be the main axis size minimum, so the minimum size available, and the main axis alignment should be center. If we were to remove this, you can see that it basically starts like at the left side, which is not what we want. We want it to be more in the middle. So just main axis alignment center works a little bit better. And okay, now what we're gonna do is, yeah, this is wrapped in an expanded, the text. Padding of 16, text gets a name, and the reason that we're wrapping this in an expanded is for the following. If we were to remove this, it might end up that we actually get an overflow error if the name is too long. And as you can see, we say that when the text is, there's no space for the text to render, we specify an overflow property, and we set the text overflow lib, so it will show like 3 dots to show that there's not enough space. That's the reason that we wrap it and expand it. Then we just have some styles as well. Okay, so now what we can do is we need to customize this slightly to just make it look better, to make it more like what appears over here, or I should say the dark one over here. The problem at the moment is that it's taking up all of the space available to it. We want to restrict the size of this slightly. So how we're going to do that is where we are rendering these stories. So in this ListView.builder, we are just going to wrap this in a size box, and we will set that the width should be 60. Okay, so now we're getting somewhere, and now you can see that it's doing those ellipses. So again, if I were to remove the expanded, oh, it's actually working. Don't mind me, but yeah, we'll just keep the expanded anyway. Above the size box, we'll wrap it in a padding, and there we go. Padding of 8 is perfect. And yeah, now we're getting somewhere. It's looking a little bit more like it should look. One thing that's bugging me though is like the amount of space that's being taken here. I'm actually gonna remove the edge inserts that we have. So this margin, we're not gonna say it for all. I'm gonna say that this is only top. So we only want it for the top to actually have like a little bit of a padding. Honestly, we can actually remove it. To be completely honest, we don't need it. Okay, so that's out. Next up, the stories is another problem. For one, it should be at the left side. So to do that, we will say that the main axis alignment would be the start. And I'm a little bit confused because that should have worked. Oh, I'm lying. It should be cross-axis alignment. There we go. So the cross-axis alignment, we want to set that to be the start, so it goes to the left. And then for this one, we want to wrap it in a padding. And I'm just going to copy over this custom padding that I made. So we're saying that the padding should only be left 16 top, 8 bottom, 16. Fantastic. And we can remove this constant. Okay, now this is looking very similar to what it should be looking. We are getting closer to the end results for this page. What we're going to do now is we're going to create this list view. So to begin, I'm actually just going to create this. Let's assume we don't have anything complicated. Actually, I'm lying. What we want to do now is we want to create a little bit more complex scrolling, because remember, we want this widget to be in a scrollable widget. So this horizontal scrolling should be in a vertical scrolling as well, which becomes a little bit hard to do with normal list views. And as a result, we will actually be using something else. We will use something called a custom scroll view. I had to look up the name now. Custom scroll view, and the custom scroll view works with slivers. And underneath, Flutter uses slivers for scrolling by default. List views are using slivers. And I definitely suggest reading up more on this. There's a ton of cool things you can do with slivers. So if you ever want to do complex scrolling with like cool transitions and like weird stuff happening, definitely a custom scroll view with slivers. And how it works is you can give it a list of slivers that does different things. So you can have like a grid view in one sliver, a list view in another one, a custom object in another one, like a fixed box or something like that. So yeah, that's where it comes in. And the first thing that we want to do is we want to give it the stories. Like we want the stories to be at the top. But the problem is this is going to be given error because it's saying that each child must be laid out. No, what's the error? I'm just going to restart because it should give an error. Okay, the error is that okay, I can't find the good description for what I want to show an example of, but the reason it's giving an error is because the custom scroll view is, because this needs to be a sliver. Okay, so we can make this a sliver by overriding this with something called a sliver to box adapter. Okay, this should work maybe. Okay, there we go. And as I said, a sliver is a scrollable thing, or a sliver is something that goes into the custom scroll bar to indicate that it's going to be scrollable. Okay, so now if you scroll, cool, it's scrollable, but it's also scrollable here because this is a list view. But the box adapter is telling it that it's just a fixed size. Okay, so that's how you got around that. You could have done a list view inside the list view, or a sliver list inside the sliver list. Many ways to do it. This is the way that I chose. Next, what we want to do is we want to create the vertical scrolling. So the scrolling that we get here. And for that, just call the sliver list. Okay. And a sliver list takes something called a delegate. And the delegate is what you use to describe the type of sliver that it is. So there's going to be a sliver list, sliver child builder delegate. Get a delegate, or this will get a build context. Let's wrap it in build context, and it gets an int index. And now if we, for example, just return text, there you go. Now we have a scroll view, and it's just going to infinitely return the value, whatever we return here. But obviously that's not what we want. We want to return our own custom unique widget. And for that, we are going to create a new widget, another one. And just to actually organize it, let's keep stories at the top. Story card, let's keep it at the bottom. We'll create a stateless widget. I'm going to call this message tile. And the message tile should have a row, which is the icon, then the name, and then the text. So we'll return a row, and then children. The first one is going to be an avatar. And now you can see that we already have an issue. We'll say it's a medium. We require a URL, okay? So we need to do some data generation again. So for now, let's just comment this out. And in this one, I'm actually going to extract this to its own little method. So we're just going to copy this out. And at the bottom here, we'll create a new method, which will return a widget. We'll call it delegate. So this is a good example of when you want to actually extract to a widget to a method like this. just to clean things up a little. And then here we're going to give the delegate. Okay, and yeah, this is just a little bit cleaner. And then in this one, we are going to create a new faker, which is a faker. And then here we need a date as well, because as you can see, this has like a date of like when a message happened. And for that, we will actually create a new model just to make things a little bit simpler. So here where we pass in this message tile, we're going to create a model called message data. So in our models, we're going to create a new file called message data.dart, just to easily pass things around. Call it message data. And in the message data, we want these fields: sender name, the message, the date time of the message, the date message, so basically just a UI message that we can show when the date or when the message happened, and then the URL to the profile picture. I'm just going to create a constructor for all of these fields, and then we want this to be named constructors. So I'm going to wrap it in brackets, these squiggly brackets, and then for all of these, Command Option down shortcuts, then you can just say required. We want them all to be required, and I'm going to say that this is immutable, and there we go. That's all we need. One thing, if you only need the immutable class, you can just import the meta from packages, but it's not really necessary. Okay, so then in models we will export that as well, message data. And we will say organize imports. So it's alphabetically organized. A little bit of a shortcut, Command-Shift-P, organize imports. You can do that like that. Okay, and back in, what was it? Message page. We want the message tile to actually get message data. So final message data. And we'll give in the message data, and same thing, required this.message data. The warning here is saying that we're not using it yet. Okay, so we'll return a message tile, which requires that now. And message data. Now let's do the sender name first. This is going to be faker.person. .name. Sorry, I'm just going to format this a little bit so we can see. Then Command-Shift spacebar on VS Code brings up this thing so you can actually see the stuff that you still need. Message is going to be faker.string or something like that. lorem.sentence. Yeah, we'll do sentence. And for the rest of these, I'm just going to copy them in. So the date is now something that we're going to get from our helper class. So date helpers random date, and Jiffy is something new that we will need. So in PubSec, we will add another one. We'll call it Jiffy. It's a new package that we're adding. And Jiffy is just a quick way for you to create like nice messages from dates. So this date, it takes in the dates that we have here, and then it tells you like from now in a message format. So you'll see it once we render it. And the date that we're getting is a random date subtracted by it's date now subtracted by a random seconds. That's 200,000. So it just shows like something that happened like maybe a couple months ago, weeks or day or minutes ago. And then finally, in the message tile, that should now allow us to go and get the URL from message data, profile picture, and I do think we may just need to do a force quit and restart. Give me a moment. Okay, we're getting there. So now we have our avatar. As you can see, it's just showing random avatars. We want a little bit more info though. We want the name and like the message and all of that as well. Okay, the first thing that we want to do is we want to give this some padding. and we'll give it a padding of 10. Okay, we're getting there. Then we are going to wrap, or not wrap, we're going to create an expanded widget. So take up all of the available space, and then the child for this is going to be a column. So the column would be the name and then this message. So column, we'll give it children, and this will be message data dot sender name, and this will be text and message data dot message. Okay, so now we have some issues. For one, it's showing like the whole text message, the whole sentence, which we don't want. Also, the formatting is obviously not correct. Also, it's centering the stuff. So yeah, the first thing that we can do is we can say that the cross-axis alignment should be start. Okay, we're getting there. So now it's actually looking a lot better, but you can see some of the sentences or messages are still way too long. So what we're going to do to fix that is in the, before we actually do that, let's do some formatting. We will set the style for this like this. So just specifying it's bold. Here we're specifying that there's some letter spacing of 0.2, so that the spacing between the letters are a little bit longer, and then the word spacing is 1.5, also a little bit longer. So it just looks a little bit more like a title. The text overflow, we will set that to be ellipse. And then to restrict this, we're going to wrap this, to restrict that it goes to 2 lines, in a size box, and we will say that the height is equal to 20. And now you can see that it's no longer going to be showing like all of the text that's available. And it's also not giving an issue because it's wrapped in an expanded. It's not showing a render overflow or something like that. The expanded is also serving a multiple purpose because the column doesn't know what the width should be. It might take up all the available space. Let's actually see. But yeah, now you can see that we're getting text overflows because the column doesn't know when to stop, essentially. So when we say that this should be in an expanded, then great. And we will actually say that the overflow for this should be the same. Okay, great. And now you can see that we get like little dots for where the text actually overflows. Finally, I'm just going to copy over this style. And yeah, this style is just faded text, and the font size is 12. So it just looks a little bit smaller. And there you can see it looks similar to what we have over there. Let's actually, for fun, go to main.dart and make this a light theme for once. Just to switch things up a little. And now you can see everything changed, everything is working. The only thing that's actually broken is the icon button over there. And the reason that the icon button is no longer showing, or that it's white, is because normally an icon or the app bar is a dark color. So normally the white icon would work on dark colors. So what we're going to do is in home screen for the scaffold, so in the app bar, we need to set the icon theme to be the current theme of context.icon theme. So it takes the current theme that we have and sets the correct value. So now if we save it, it's going to use the correct value that's set for the icon theme. And if you take a look at our theme class, so let's jump to themes. You can see we set an icon theme to be icon light when it's dark, and we set an icon theme of icon dark when it's the light theme. And here's the icon dark color, and here's the icon light color. Very similar though. Almost looks the same. Okay, so back to what we wanted to do. Let's go to our messages page. And one thing that's a little bit bugging me is the fact that it looks like there should be more spacing between the message and the name. We are gonna need to add this or wrap this with a padding, and we only want it to be at the top and the bottom. We don't want it left and right. So we're gonna say symmetric, and symmetric allows you to set vertical or horizontal. So we'll set vertical, and there we go. Now we have a little bit of a padding at the top and the bottom. So now it looks closer to what it should be. Okay. And then finally, to the right, we need this message, like when it was sent, and we need that little icon. So that's actually, I'm just going to copy that and then we can discuss it. So at the bottom of the size box, I'm going to paste this in, save, and we have an issue. Okay, the issue is I shouldn't paste it in the column, I should paste it in the row. The row is going left to right, save it, there we go. So what this is doing, it's wrap everything in a padding of 20. Oh, it's only wrapping right to a padding of 20, so the right here. Then we're creating a column, so the column is the text and this thing. Then we're centering it, cross-axis alignment is end, so that it goes to the right. If we were to say that this is start, this is what it would look like. But yeah, no, we want it to be end. Then we're just specifying a little bit of a height there, just to like make it exactly correct. And then we are creating a text. We're getting the date message, which is using Jiffy to tell us that the message was sent a day ago, or 23 hours, or 6 hours, or whatever. Okay. Then calling to uppercase, have some text styling. Then we have a size box, so some spacing between here. Then a container, and the container is getting a decoration, and we're specifying box decoration, giving it a color, and then a shape of circle. So that's how we're getting the circular shape. This is the best way to create a circular icon or anything circular using a container. It's also actually preferable to do this than doing clips, if you've been using clips at all. And then yeah, we're centering the text within that in the middle. For now, it's just like this default one. This is supposed to indicate that you have a message or not. We're not going to be mocking that. For now, this should be fine. And then just a text style, giving it a light text style, giving it a light text color. Okay, great. So everything works except for the fact that you can see at the bottom here, this is not what we want. Like there should be some padding or something there. So let's go back to home screen. And in the bottom navigation bar, we're going to give this some padding. So let's scroll down. We have safe area, cool, which is immediately a row. What we actually want is we want this to be a card. Because if you note, for the white theme, it's white. But for the dark color, it's different. Like it's using like this card color, like the stories board color. So we're going to wrap all of the row in a card. Okay, great. Now the problem is though, like you can see, like we have this padding at the bottom, which is not what we want. We want this to be above the safe area. So shortcut, you can say swap with parent. Okay, great. The card, we don't want it to, you can see like it's creating this stupid margin. Like we don't want that. We're going to say margin 0. And then for the row, we're going to give it a padding. And we're going to say only. And I'm just going to copy it in. Okay, so now this looks better. But as I said, for the dark theme, we want this to use the card color. We don't want it for the light theme. So how we're going to do that is we are going to get the brightness first. So from our theme, we'll get the brightness. So theme.of the context, call brightness. And in the color, we will say that if the brightness equals brightness dot light, then we will show colors dot transparent. Otherwise, we will say null, not specify anything in. And this means that we also forgot to put the shadow color. So this is the shadow. That's why it's so dark. We'll say that, not shadow, the elevation. We'll put the elevation to be 0. We can also specify that this should instead have been not a card, but we could have done like a container and get the color from theme as well. So now for the bright theme, it has a transparent color. But if we go to main.dart and we make this dark, you can see it uses the card color instead. And I do believe that is close to what it should be. Oh, no, it's not. As you can see, all of these messages are way too close together. We also don't have like little indicators between them. So in messages page, where we render the message tile, we want to separate this slightly. So at the moment, this is just a row. Okay. To begin, we are going to wrap this in a container. So wrap this with a container, and we will say that the height is equal to 100. And we'll give it a margin. So it just basically like a padding within the container itself. And then we will specify that the container should get a decoration. And the decoration is going to be this. So the box decoration, we give it a border, and we're saying that we only want a bottom, and this is going to be a border side, and we're saying that it's color of gray and width of 0.2. And there we go, now we have that. And for this row that we have here, we are going to wrap this in a padding as well. And the padding that we'll give is a padding of 4 for all. Now the last thing that we need to do is we need to fix this issue that we have here. As you can see that this column is not showing it correctly. And that is because we're setting it to be start at the moment, which is fine. We want the cross axis to be start, but we want the main axis to be center. And there we go. Now we centered it with these like small adjustments that we made. We now have something that looks way closer to what the actual end results should be. I'll show you how we can fully test it in a moment. Something that is bugging me though is the fact that it does look like we're taking up more space than necessary at the bottom here. So let's investigate that. We'll go to our home screen, and this is the navigation bar item. Sorry, not item, we want the bottom navigation bar for the whole thing over here. And let's see if there's anything that we can do to make this slightly smaller. Let's put the bottom false. So at some point we are doing like some padding. It's not here. It's not in the row, so let's see the items. I guess we can try and make this smaller, so maybe 60. Let's try 50. Okay, let's keep it at 60, and we'll add the this glowing button next, and bring back this. Okay, never mind, that's a small thing. We can live with that. Okay, so now let's actually create this button. And for that, we will create a new widget because we will have this be in multiple locations. We're going to have it here, and we're going to have one here. It's just going to be a different color. So let's actually proceed to do that. And in widgets, we will create a new file, and we will call this glowing action button. And this is going to be a lot of code to write out, so just to save time, I'm just going to bring in this as an example. I'm just going to copy paste it, and we can go through this together. But yeah, I'm just going to copy it in. You can get the code from GitHub if you want to avoid writing all of this. We'll get back to it in a moment and explain more. But let's bring it into our app. In messages, where we have, oh sorry, not messages, in home screen, between the top two navigations, we are going to bring in this now. So glowing action button. And the color is going to be colors dot secondary. Oh, sorry, app colors. The icon is going to be icons.plus. Let's say cappuccino icons. Dot add, I believe. And then on pressed is just going to be a to do for now. Okay, and then just some formatting. Okay, cool. So now we have our icon button over here, but the problem is that our layout looks odd. This is not in the center anymore. As you can see, these are like spreading out. The calls one is smaller than the notifications one, we'll fix that in a moment. In the glowing action bar button though, we get a color, icon data, the size, which is default 54, and an avoid callback. We have a container, decoration, the color sets in the decoration, the shape is a circle as you would expect, and then the glow that we're getting is through this box shadow over here. And what this box shadow is a list of box shadows. So for example, if we were to remove these three, it's still fine. It's just going to be one shadow. And what we're actually doing is we are giving different offsets and different intensities to create our own effect. Okay, so that's like one way you can like stack shadows on top of each other and like give them different directions in which they go. So as an example, let's just increase the spread here to like 10 and increase the intensity to like 1. Now I can see it's like a very intense spread or like glow. This actually doesn't look too bad, to be honest. Let's just make this 0.1, 0.2. Yeah, that actually looks pretty decent. It actually looks better than what I had before. Yeah, so let's actually just leave it like that. I'm going to remove this. This is something that I copied from the interwebs. Yeah, I kind of like this more. Yeah, let's see how it looks. Cool, it can maybe be 3. Yeah, cool. That's like the intensity. With opacity, makes something, sets the opacity to be 0.3, so 30%. So it makes it a little bit lighter. It makes it more see-through, it makes it opaque. Okay, so now we need to fix the other things, but yeah, let's continue down this rabbit hole. What we're doing now is creating I'll get to this in a bit. We have a size box with the size that we set it to, which is a default of 54, if I remember, yeah. And we have an icon, which is the icon that we pass in, size of 26. So straightforward. What we're doing though is like when you tap this, we want it to have like that little effect as well. So to do that, we wrap it in an inkwell and we give the splash color to be card light, this color that we specify over here. And then we wrap it in a material, and this material we are specifying that we give it a color that we pass into the thing, and then we're using a clip oval to clip everything. And in this instance, this was the best way that I found to create a tappable icon like this. I'm sure there are many ways that you can do it, but yeah, clip oval is sometimes very convenient just to automatically clip everything. And the reason that this is a child of the container is because we don't want to clip the box shadow. So that's why. We still want to show the shadow outside. All right. So if we jump back to home screen and we explore this now, the problem is that this is not the same height for each, or the same width for all of these. So what we will do is we will set explicit width for these navbar items. So I'm going to jump to it, and you know what? The reason that we were making mistakes is because we actually don't need a height here. What we want to do, I made a copy mistake when I was cheating on my test. This should be a width of 70. Okay. So now we are hard coding what the width should be. So all of them will be a width of 70, and no matter what the content is. So no matter where we click here, it's going to be like, in calls, and then it's going to be contacts. Okay, and then you can see now it's spread evenly, and this is nice in the center. And one thing that we can do as a little extra touch for this glowing action button, we're going to wrap this in a padding. And we will say that this is a horizontal, no, is it going to be symmetrical? Horizontal. Value of 8. And that should be fine. Yeah, so we're just giving up a little bit more space between the button and these icons. And yeah, there we go. Let's see if everything is still working. Perfect. So we have this page, and just to verify that it looks okay, when we set this to light, yeah, it looks fine. It doesn't look bad. This can maybe be slightly bigger, but we're gonna leave it. Okay, so now what we want to do is when we tap one of these items, we want to go to the message page. So let's go to main.dart. Sorry, I want to say home instead. It's a home screen. And for these actual tiles, oh no, I'm lying. It should be in messages. So for one of these tiles, not stories, message tile, we are gonna need to wrap this in maybe an inkwell. So wrap in inkwell. And the inkwell is what's going to create that splash effect on tap. And cool. So now we've got little splash effects for these widgets. And we're going to create a new screen. So new, I'm going to say message screen, or maybe chat screen. Stateless widgets. And we'll call it chat screen. And for the chat screen, we will get message data. Okay, so that model that we defined. And here it's fine, we can just import that. But might as well import models, why not? Okay, so now required this.message data. And now we're just going to create a helper function. I'm going to copy it over. So this is just a static method on chat screen called root that we pass in message data, and it returns a root, or it returns a material page root, which will do the default transition on Flutter. So for Flutter, that transition would be, for iOS, that transition would be like a swipe right, and for Android, it would be like this pop-up thing, I think. If I remember correctly. And then what we will return in the material page root is the chat screen, and we need to pass in the data that we give here. So this is just a quick and convenient, easy way to actually create a root, to define a root on a screen so that you don't have to type it again and again. There's many ways you can do navigation in Flutter, especially if you use the new Navigator 2.0, but plain old navigation was fine, especially for this example. So yeah, in the inkwell, we're going to say navigator.of context.push. So push a new screen, and the chat screen is what we want. Actually, now, before we forget, in screens, we're going to export the chat screen as well. All right, so chat screen. And now we need to give it the message data, but not like this. We're not creating the widget here. We are creating a root and pushing that widget. And the data for this root is going to be the same. So we need the message data that we get. So pass it in, because we already have it in the message tile. And now if you click this, okay, it's giving an error just because we are returning a container with null. So this is going to be a new screen, so body, and we'll just do this for now. Click it, and there's our test. Let's create an AppBar. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to cheat and copy in our AppBar. Okay, so the first thing that we need is we need to import our icon button, and we can import cappuccino. We'll go through all of this in a bit. AppBar title, we're going to comment this out for now. And then we need to create a new widget called icon border. So this is similar to the icon button that we have, or this icon background that we have. So if we jump here, I'm just going to copy paste the actual widget. And this is very similar to what we had before. Now the only difference is that we are creating a border. So you see that this is like a border over there. now we just want to create that. So we also want the inkwell effect to happen. So inkwell, we have a splash color, radius for it, a radius for a container with a decoration. We give it a border across all sides with this color, width of 2, padding, and an icon. Well, icon with a padding. Great. That's it's very similar to what we had in this one over here. That I believe we also I copy pasted. So jumping back to the chat screen, what we want is we want to create this AppBar title, and we want to pass in the message data. So let's create a new stateless widget and call it AppBar title. And as you can see, this is a little bit different. It gets the avatar and then gets the name and everything else. I'm just going to copy paste that over because, again, by now we should be familiar with this process. So replacing the build with the following. And this requires message data. So final, we just pass in the message data that we get from the parent, and we will say that this is a required attribute. Okay, cool. So just a row returns a small avatar, size box, little spacing, then expand it to say take up all the available space, then column, so column from top to bottom, center the alignment, start the carousel axis, text for this over here with some style and overflows, some spacing between the texts, and then another text that says online, and then it's always going to be online for now. Later on we'll make this reactive. Okay, so now the last little bit that we want to do is render these things, and we also need this bottom one. And by now you should be familiar with a lot of this process, and I'm actually just going to copy paste it and we can go over it, because honestly it's not that hard. It just takes time to actually lay it out. For this content that we're rendering over here, we are going to call it demo message list. Okay, and this is just static content. We're not creating random stuff, just easier like that. And it's just the list view for now, and then we're giving data with widgets that we're going to make now. So this date label is what we need to make first. The date label widget is this yesterday over here. So to specify what the date is. So I'm just going to copy that over. So at the bottom here, add this date label, and let's go here and comment all of this out and pass in the demo message list in our body. And this should work. We have an error somewhere. We just need to bring in app colors. Okay, so now we have this label for yesterday. And if we take a look at what the actual label is, the only weird thing that we had to do here was the center. And the reason for that is in the list view, it goes from top to bottom, and left to right, it's going to take up all the available width. So let me show you. If we were to remove this, then it's taking up all of the size here. And for the purpose of this one, I'm actually going to change to dark mode, just because it's a little bit easier to see. Okay, date label, yeah. So now I can see it's taking up all the space. So that's why we're doing the center. Just to center it in the horizontal position. Then we have some padding, symmetrical, vertical. The padding doesn't do anything. That padding shouldn't be there, should it? Let me remove this and see what happens. Oh, yeah. Okay, the padding makes sense. It's symmetrical, it's vertical. So it gives padding at the top, it gives padding at the bottom. So as you can see, we have padding at the top, padding at the bottom, so that there's space between the messages as they're in the list view. And then we have another padding for the actual container with a decoration of color, card color, and we have a border radius of 12. So that's giving us a nice little curve there. And card color again, as we've used before. And then we specify padding vertical 4, and 12 to the left and 12 to the right, horizontal, vertical. then just specifying the text and some styling. Now what we want is this message tile. So I'm just gonna copy, comment this, and then we can create the message tile. Okay, and you can see there's two, there's message tile and message own tile. I'm gonna copy both because they're basically the same, just small differences, as you can see in our UI mockup over here. Okay, message tile and message own tile. There you go, now it's rendering. This is what it looks like. Spoiler. Let's look at message tile. So message tile is someone else sends you a message. The first thing that we need to do is we need to know that it needs to be on the left side. So that's why we use alignment center left. However, we do give it a slight padding, horizontal, so top and bottom, and vertical, no, horizontal left, right, vertical, top, bottom. And this A to here is just that little padding there. If we were to remove it, then you can see it goes away. But yeah, we need a little bit of padding. It might actually make sense to remove this, to be honest. I'm going to remove it here. And I'm also going to remove it in the message own tile, where we have all padding to be symmetrical and only vertical, and vertical of 4. Okay, and then instead of doing it like that, in our list view, I'm just going to wrap this with a padding and say symmetrical, and this should be horizontal. So now I'm wrapping the whole list view in a padding instead of having all of the paddings at the individual layers. That's going to be better from, you know, all perspectives. It's going to be fewer widgets, fewer layouts. It's a lot better. Okay, so yeah, to continue exploring the message tile, we have an alignment. Then we have a column. The column is separation of two things. This container, the message box, and then the time that the message was sent. So you can see that we have two children, the container and then the text, which is the message date. That's wrapped in a padding and then has some text style. And then the container, which is a decoration, box decoration, and then card color as always, and then border radius. This is how we're getting this neat effect where one corner is pointing. We're saying that we only want a circular radius only for top left, top right, and bottom right. Top left, top right, blah, blah. And then the border radius is 26. Cool. So easy peasy. Quite easy to do that. And then padding. So just giving some spacing for horizontal and vertical, different sizes for the two, and then giving the message. And no styling for the message. And then this is the message tile, which is from someone else's message. For your message, what we want is just some changes. Exactly the same. We're only centering right the alignment. And for the border radius, we are now ignoring the top right one. So just giving radiuses for everything except for top right, at the top right here. And that's it. And also, yeah, for the column, we are saying that the cross-axis alignment should be end, because we want these to be to the right. And at the top here, it's going to be start. So we want them to be aligned at the start. Nice. Cool. The last thing that we want is that little bar at the bottom. So our message input box here. And I'm going to copy pasta that one as well, just because, again, it is very similar to what we had before. We're going to call it action bar. So at the bottom, we will add this, bring in glow action button, and I'll show you what this looks like or what it does exactly. But before we get there, I'm going to wrap this. So this is in the body of the scaffold where we're just showing this list view here. We're going to wrap this in a column. And at the bottom here, we'll show the action bar. And this is going to give an error because a message list view, again, doesn't know how big it should be. And a column takes up all of the available size, but again, it doesn't know how big it should be unless we tell it to be a certain size. So if we were to say wrap with widget, fixed box, or if I can type, oh, size box, sorry, height of 100. Now it's everything is literally it's just in this small little container here, which is not what we want. What we want is to give it expanded height. So tell it to be as big as it wants to be. And now you can see that, yay, we have this as big as possible. So const, and now you can also see that we have our action bar or action bar at the bottom here. And this is elements that we should know, except for the text input box, which is kind of new. Again, we're wrapping in a safe area, setting that the bottom is true for the safe area, so we have some space there if there's a notch or whatever in the phone. And then we're creating a row left to right, and we're creating first off a container. And the reason that we have a container here is because we want that little border at the right. So you can see we have border right, border side, to divider color. So we're using the divider color from the theme. And if you don't know, divider is literally just a horizontal line in Flutter. It's a widget. What we want now is the icon, which is the child of the container. And then we'll give some horizontal padding left and right to it. Camera full is the icon. And then we're telling expanded for the row, be as big as you want to be. And we give a text field, decoration, no input border. By default, Flutter has this ugly text border, which I hate. Take that away. Hint text, type something, which is what we want as the hint. Maybe ... Is it ... Yeah, type something ... Okay, cool. And then at the far right, we have padding. We're giving it a padding of left 12, just some spacing between the text box and this. So if we were to type all of this there, some spacing. Then right 24, glowing action button, which we created. And then color of accent, only time we use this red ever. And then the icon, which is icons that send rounded. And beautiful. On pressed, we will add a print to do for next time when we continue with this tutorial to do. Send a message. And click it. Cool, it's working. And let's just see all our problems that we have. This can be a constant. Print calls in production, that's fine. And yeah, that is our chat application. Oh, random chance, we have a Gordon Leffler. My name is Gordon, if you didn't know. So yeah, a little trick that I'd like to show you that I do to just see that it's close to what it should look like is on an emulator on Mac, Command S takes a screenshot, and then you can just drag this over, but I can't do that now. Let's bring this one there. Nope, let's bring this one to Figma and go back to our app, screenshot, bring it into Figma, and we'll just make this smaller. And the idea is that you lower the opacity, rotate it, slightly rotate it as you can see, bring it down, and then you like overlay it to the final thing that you have, and try and see like how close did you get. One thing that I can see is that our icon here is too small, and the icons for this also seem too small. Maybe they should be bigger. And this, maybe there can be some padding over there. And I'm not going to bore you with that. I'll do that at the end of this video, make it perfect, get it to the point where it's like exactly what it should be. So there may be slight differences between what you saw in this video and what the final code will be that's on GitHub. But nothing major, no real name changes and stuff like that. Just maybe some small paddings and tweaks and stuff like that. But yeah, that's normally the process that I take to do something like a design like this and tackle it. And it takes a while, it takes a lot longer than you think. But yeah, that's this video. Please let us know down in the comments what you thought about the tutorial. Was it too slow, too fast? Could you follow along? Did you find it helpful, not helpful? What would you like to see in future tutorials? And definitely what would you like to see in the upcoming video for this? Yeah, until then, we will see you next time. Goodbye.